with that, I am going to turn it over to Randy.
Oh man, thank you so much, Brittany. I really appreciate that. Kelsey and the rest of the Cash team, Allison, Mario, Lisa. So many great people are part of this organization, and I appreciate the fact that you guys are really leaning into the things that creatives need in this community, both here in Northwest Arkansas and elsewhere, right? Because you guys are actually, your footprint's larger than what people realize. And so I'm thankful to be able to just share today. And I know they already put the ground rules out, but I'm going to tell you that I definitely, you're not going to throw me off. I really want this to be interactive. I don't know about you guys, but you know, a lot of times when over the last couple of years since we've been on Zoom, we are used to having a bunch of talking heads talking at us, but I really want to talk to you and with you as opposed to talking at you. And so what I really want to focus on today is having this conversation. I'm about to turn on the PowerPoint presentation that I've created, but this needs to be interactive for us to get something out of it, for you to walk away with something that says, you know what, that was really worth my hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes or however long it is, or maybe you guys will kick me out in 30 minutes, I don't know. But the bottom line is we're going to have some fun and we're going to learn some things, and I hope you walk away with something of value that will help you out. And certainly keep your phones on mute your phone, and just turn it down. Like take it right now and just take it and put it down, face down, so you don't even see an alert before it pops up, because it's going to pop up. Everybody's going to get a message, and trust me, the sky isn't falling, and you'll be okay for the next hour if you don't return an email or a text, unless you got a sick child in the hospital or a sick parent. Outside of that, put your phone down for a minute, and let's lean in for this one. I think you're going to enjoy it. So here we go, and I want to just share with you this presentation that I put together. And I think you guys are going to like it. And now I need to make sure that I'm sharing the screen properly.
Hey, Randy, while you're doing that, I since you said that it won't throw you off if we interrupt, I'm going to test you here. Could everybody please put in the chat what organization you are affiliated with?
That would be good. That would be good.
This is, and maybe I'm jumping the gun. Maybe you're totally gonna do that.
No,
right?
I totally want you. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, that's why we have you here. So yeah,
I'm eager to know who's in the room. So, and if you're not affiliated with an organization, that's fine too. I just would love to know who's here. So you're all so welcome. Thanks for taking the time to be part of this conversation. Thanks, y'all.
Right. So yeah, everybody, please let us know where you're from, who you are, your claim to fame, and put that stuff in the chat, because I'd love to see where you guys are from. I'd be interested just to know more about the types of organizations that are represented on this call here. So, but let's just jump into it. First and foremost, again, I want to thank Brittany for even reaching out to me and asking me to talk about this subject matter, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Storytelling is something that I have been, that has moved me for forever and a day. But, you know, let's face it, it's moved us all. I mean, storytelling has been around since the beginning of time. And so we're going to get into talking about why you should be shouting your story from the rooftops as early and as often as possible. So I don't ever want there to be a time when you don't feel like you can tell your story. Your story should be told at all times. And we've already kind of gone through my brief introduction, so that'll be there. I love this quote from Maya Angelou, and she said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. And I wanted to bring a native sister into this conversation, since she is from Arkansas, and so she had such a profound way with words and a profound way with prose and storytelling. And I mean, for some of you probably remember the books that she's written, and I just think it's important for us to lean on those that came before us and wrote stories and told stories in such a profound way, because they allow us to start to realize that, man, we have stories to tell, that there are things inside of us that are really important. And so I think it's just important for us to think about that. And I have a few quotes throughout this presentation that I think will sit well with you as you start to marinate and chew on these ideas that I'm going to share with you over the next hour or so. My goal is to talk I could talk for a long time, clearly, but I really do want you guys to interject. So if there are questions that you have or things like that come up, I'll leave it to Kelsey and Brittany to monitor that chat. I can't, that's the one thing I can't do. And then they'll point out and say, hey, we got a question that just came up on this issue, and we'll try to address it right then and there. And then we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So don't worry, we will cover it, and we'll make sure that you guys get, get your value out of this. So these are some of the discussion points, but not all of them. Just wanted to give you an idea of where we're taking this trip. We're going to talk about overcoming the obstacles, right? What is the big issue that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years plus? And that's COVID. COVID is real. COVID impacted each and every one of us to different degrees. And I think it certainly is to act as if it never happened or to just try to move on as business as usual is actually a mistake. There is an opportunity for you to kind of to look at how that impacted your business, your personal life, and how that is going to control how you do things moving forward. Because let's face it, it's impacting all of us in varying degrees, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why your story matters. A lot of times we are the worst agents for ourselves. We don't promote ourselves properly. We don't share good news. We don't let people know all the good things that are happening in and around us. A lot of times because of false humility, because we don't want to be seen as being bodacious, braggadocio, or whatever. But the bottom line is you need to tell your story, because a lot of times your story is the one thing that might free somebody else from a challenge that they're struggling with. And if you think of it from that perspective, then that's more of a sharing perspective when it comes to telling your story, right? Because sharing is caring. We want you to own your subject matter. I know a lot of people are masters at their domain, yet they act like they're mice. And they keep very quiet. They keep to themselves. They don't share any information. They don't share any data points. And that's a mistake that a lot of people make. And so I really want to encourage you today to be thinking about how you can own your subject matter, especially if you're a subject matter expert. And if you're not a subject matter expert, you need to be a subject matter expert on whatever you're doing. We also want to talk about building relationships and community. One of the reasons why I am here today in front of you is because of relationships and community. Period. End of story. I would not be in front of you today if that weren't the case, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The other thing I want you to think about is your creativity is your platform, right? Everybody's always looking for some new platform to create, or man, just one day when I get to this place in life, or when I get to this place with my business or with my organization, then we'll have a platform. You are your platform. It begins and ends with you. You are your biggest competition, and you are your platform. And you need to understand that. And so I really want everybody here to start thinking differently about how you lean into the creativity that God gave you, that the abilities that you have, that other people look at you in amazement and say, how did you do that? Man, that's so beautiful what you created. Wow, that really touched me in a profound way. When you hear feedback like that from people, from things that you've created or you've been a part of creating, that should send goosebumps up your arm. And a lot of times we don't look at it that way. It's just another day. And that's not the case. And that's not the focus that I want you to have. And then the final thing is never quit. Like I said, we got slapped in the face for 2 years with a pandemic that really changed things fundamentally for a lot of people. But we can't give up. We're not a nation that gives up. We aren't people that give up. And I think here in Northwest Arkansas, with all the special things that are happening in this area, how the narrative of the growth of this area, when you think about the Sam Waltons and the J.B. Hunts, and I mean, obviously these are titans of industry, but then you think of the other creative people that have come through this corridor and have left their thumbprint on this area. They did not give up. And so I really want us to be reminded of that this is a long game. And this is what I tell young people all the time. And I know there's some people that are younger than me on this call, and some people that are older than me. But the reality is I always have to remind myself it's a long game, and I'm not playing for just the first inning. I'm playing for the whole thing. So I really want to encourage you with that. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? And this was something that I'm really thankful for Brittany bringing this up, because I thought about it, but I didn't think about it because I tried not to. I won't say that the pandemic didn't affect me because it did. I lost a lot of business. I went from doing this, doing that, traveling all over the country. And then in March of 2020, I came back from a business trip in Boston, and that was it. Everything got cut, not even in half, got cut down by 90%. I mean, for some of us, we just went home and crawled up in our beds and just, we didn't know what to do. It was just a tough situation, right? And I mean, there was no frame of reference. As I told people about COVID, in terms of thinking about it, when you think about situations like this that happen, I mean, it's not even a once in a generation thing. This was like, once every 100 years or more. I can remember back when my grandparents would talk to me. I lived with my grandparents growing up, my maternal grandparents. I was very close with all my grandparents, but my maternal grandparents I lived with, and they survived both the Spanish flu back in 1918, and they survived the Depression. And man, they had some stories to tell about the challenges that they overcame during those times. Yet and still they persevered. And that's sometimes is we need to those that's why those stories matter, because everybody has a story to tell about how they overcame an issue, right? How you overcame a problem with your business, how you overcame a challenge in your creative process, whatever it is. We need those stories are important. And so this this last 2 year experiment that we went through, and please hear me very clearly, I'm not making light of this situation in any way, shape, or form. I had family members that died. I had friends that lost their lives to COVID. It has impacted us in different ways on different levels, and I totally respect that. But and still, we have to move forward. And that's really my encouragement today, specifically with COVID, because I know when I think of cash and when I think of what cash represents, I know I went to an event that you guys had a while ago, and there were a lot of people out, people were wearing masks, and things are just fundamentally different now than they were just a couple of years ago. We took it for granted for just getting together with a bunch of folks casually, whereas now some of those same folks you would have gotten together with just to hang out, some of them are maybe they've struggled with long COVID. Maybe they just have a fear of getting COVID because of other people that have gotten it in their family. Or there are a multitude of reasons how people have been impacted by this unfortunate pandemic. And we're still in it, right? We haven't gotten the clear green light yet. So I just want you still have to be careful, and don't be wanton or reckless in any way, because there are people out there that are immunocompromised. There's a lot of challenges. Yet and still, these individuals are there looking to still appreciate life, still taking advantage of all that is available to us. And so I just really want to encourage you about that. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that. And for me, that is the elephant in the room for all of us. I don't think any one of us is excluded from that predicament when you think of COVID and how it impacted our daily lives. Now, there are some benefits that came out of COVID, and I certainly want to focus on that, because I like to think about the positive things that have happened. And so when I think about that, I think about, and I was telling Brittany this story about, I Am Northwest Arkansas started in April of 2019, and I basically created this podcast because podcast is my creative language. Telling stories is my creative language. Sharing my platform with others is a way that I'm able to create and share with the world. And so I created this podcast selfishly for me, because it was the podcast I would have wanted to listen to back in 2013 when I moved here to Northwest Arkansas. Because if you had told me in 2010 or 2011 or 2012 that you were moving to Arkansas, I would have said, there is no way, that I'm moving to Arkansas. And if you're a native, don't take it the wrong way. It's just what it is, okay? I was living in Boston, loving life. Everything was great. I'm an East Coast boy. I lived on the West Coast. I've lived over in Europe. There was no way I could see myself in Arkansas. But you know what they say, never say never. And lo and behold, in 2013, I ended up moving here. I was a previous owner of a company that relocated to Fayetteville. And an individual that ran that company, who's a dear friend of mine, again, relationships, and we've been friends now for 25 years, which I can't believe. It's just showing that I'm getting old. He said, hey, you should come here to Northwest Arkansas. And I was like, okay, I'll come. So I came, I hit the ground running. I knew more people. My joke was I knew more people at XNA than I knew in and around town because I was always on the road, traveling like 100,000 miles a year. And so in 2019, when I left that company, because I had just had that entrepreneurial itch, which I know a lot of you have, and I just wanted to go start my own thing again. I said, I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to tell stories here in Northwest Arkansas so I can learn more about this area. Lo and behold, had no idea it was going to lead me to where I am today. And honestly, for every single thing that I'm doing in this community here and beyond, is a lot of it has to do with this podcast. I would say probably 90% of it. And what this podcast did, because I focused on the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in the Ozarks, it gave me a narrow niche to focus on, but then it allowed me to tell a wide range of stories about this area and what makes this area so special. And so I ran with it. But within 10 months of starting this podcast, the pandemic came. I couldn't meet with people in face to face. I had to totally pivot. I had to totally look at different ways that I could tell my story and tell the stories of people that mattered. And so I remember right after everything shut down and at the end of March, early April of 2020, and I was like, well, what am I going to do? And so I said, well, I've got this platform. I was 10 months into the podcast. By that time, I had probably done about 40 episodes, maybe. So I said, you know what? I'm going to talk about this pandemic and how it's impacting business and how it's impacting people in general. And I started reaching out to folks and talking to them and putting the mic in front of them virtually, right? Just like what we're doing right now. And it just grew. And it just overnight, before you know it, I'm now up to 177 episodes as of Monday because the podcast comes out every Monday. But I've had the chance to tell so many stories. And I've really had a chance to lean in during this pandemic, and this is my point, is that the pandemic created an opportunity for me to use my talents, my skill set, my ability, my creativity to tell the story of other people in this time frame. And so it became a comfort. I had an individual reach out to me that's an executive with Tyson that said, if it wasn't for your podcast, I would not have considered moving to Northwest Arkansas because I was contending with the pandemic. I had young children. I wasn't sure what to expect. And he listened to my podcast for multiple episodes. And he said, you created a narrative for me to understand, A, what this area was all about, what the people were all about, and what I could expect. And I've actually sat down and had breakfast with this guy, and I've met several people. I've had people that have moved from the West Coast that listen to the podcast, and that was their North Star to what they were going to do and how they were going to do things if they decided to come here. I've had a couple that's a dear friend of my wife and I now that just came through the podcast, and they just appreciated the storytelling. They appreciated the transparency and the honesty, because that's the thing. When you think about what you do as a storyteller, and we are all storytellers, whether you like it or not, or whether you think you can tell a story or not, is that it's important. People want to hear what you have to share, whether you believe it or not. And so you have to be certain about what you have in you and be willing to shout it from the rooftops, right? No pun intended. So I start this podcast. It moves off. Again, it's the reason why I'm here in front of you today. One of the guests that I had early on during the pandemic was Mario Troncoso and Lisa Marie Evans, both part of Cash. And I did an episode on Ozcast, and we talked about how they were doing during the pandemic. We talked about just the whole premise behind Ozcast, about bringing all these different creatives together and showing their creative abilities on film. And we had a really great conversation. We talked about some of the locals like Pura Coco and others that are doing some amazing work in this community of artists. And we just had a lot of fun with it. And one thing led to another. I stayed in contact with them, and I just built a relationship. I reach out to Mario all the time. I reach out to Lisa Marie all the time, never with an ask, but more just to check in and see how they're doing. And then one day I got an email saying, hey, you should think about doing this, or you should think about doing that. And I've built up a relationship with Allison Esposito and others. And so there are there are a lot of things that will come together because of your ability to tell a story. And one of those specifically are just the opportunity for you to develop and build relationships. And that's simply what I've done with I Am Northwest Arkansas. It's the reason why I'm on the board of Ozark Natural Foods. The reason why I'm on the board of the Roots, like Brittany mentioned. And I don't say any of that to brag. I just say that it just happened. I mean, the board seat at ONF happened. It was just serendipity. I happened to be interviewing the general manager, Mike Anzalone from Ozark Natural Foods, and he said, "Hey, this is a stretch, but I know you're a member. Would you consider running for our board?" It was the last day to run for the board to put your papers in, and I went back and I thought about it. I talked to my wife. I decided to run, and now I'm this is my third year. I'm now the president of the board. The co-op has moved to a new space, and that to me it's like, wow, it just shows me how important relationships are and how important communication is. And a lot of times, your ability to tell a story, your ability to reach out to the widest audience possible creates opportunities for you that even right now you probably can't even fathom. Like, I could have never fathomed that opportunity to be on the board. Now it's a lot of work, right? So sometimes I think, man, Mike got the better of the deal because he got me, and I mean, I have to put in a lot of work to be on this board, and it takes away from other things that I'm doing. But I'm very thankful for the opportunity because that has opened up doors for me to meet new people and connect with people, with really amazing folks in this community, especially the local farmers that are supplying Ozark Natural Foods and have been doing it for generations. So that's those are some of the good things that can come out of a bad situation. When you think of like the pandemic, I had to pivot. I couldn't get on the road and go see clients anymore. I couldn't go teach classes anymore. So I had to think about things differently. We've all been faced with those challenges right now because of the pandemic. And some of us have had to do what we've called the pandemic pivot, right? It's beyond just having a pandemic puppy, because half the people in my neighborhood have gotten a pandemic puppy. But the pandemic pivot is where a lot of us had to say, course correct our careers, course correct our businesses to be in a place where we can remain relevant and be successful in spite of everything that is going on right now. And it's still going on, because now we're kind of like right at the crest of a recession. And I don't want to say the R word, but the reality is that right now is a challenging time for us. So how do you get through that? It's like we go out of the frying pan into the fryer. Is that how it goes? Out of the frying pan into the fryer. So something like that. But anyway, you get the idea. These challenges are always going to be with us. Yet and still, your creativity remains. So there should never be a question whether you can do something. It's just how you do it,
Hey,
why you
Randy,
do it. Yes,
I've got a question.
sure.
So how can small organizations or even mid and large size organizations leverage those relationships to begin sharing their story?
So when you say leverage those relationships, well, okay, here's the thing. This phone, and I did pick it up. I apologize. I use this phone every morning, and I take time to. You can mute yourself. I take time te- to reach out to people every day, like literally every day. I reach out to people both near and far. And people will tell you that know me around here. It's like, yeah, I just get these random texts from Randy, just checking in to see how I'm doing and what's going on. Again, there's never an ask. There's always just a, hey, how you doing? How are things going? If I know they're working on something, how did that turn out? What are you up to? How can I help? Right? Because I mean, how often do you hear, how can I help? We don't hear it that often. It's always, what can you do for me? It's never, how can I help? And I've always taken the posture in business and in life of saying, how can I help? Which means that I'm giving a hand up, not a handout. Not asking for a handout, right? I'm not looking for something. I'm looking to give something. And the minute that you put yourself in that position, that's when everything opens up. I don't care if you believe in God or not, but everything opens up. You might want to call it the law of attraction, but opportunity, with your ability to check in with people to connect with people creates opportunity for you. And so even small businesses need to be intentional about staying in contact with the people that they've done business with in the past. I could probably poll most of the people here and ask you, how many of you have reached out to former clients, to former customers, to patrons that have graced your building or purchased something from you or done something with you? And more often than not, I need to do that. I do need to reach back out to those people and just, check in and see how things are going. And too often, we use our email list as a means of continuing to ask for more and more and more instead of giving as much as you can. Because what will happen is the more that you give, the more that you'll get back in return. It's just kind of the way the universe works. I mean, it's hard for me. There's no other way to replicate that. You have to give in order to receive, right? And like I said, you can never shake anybody's hand with a closed fist. It just doesn't work. And I tell my kids that all the time. So one thing I've always drilled into them: building relationships. They'll tell you, if you pressed any of my kids, what is one concept that your father talks to you about every morning before you head to the bus? Relationships. They're everything. I mean, they literally are everything. They are oxygen. They are what we need on a daily basis. Because I can't do it without you, and you can't do it without me. And so the sooner that we realize that we are not an island unto ourselves, but yet we're part of this dynamic community that requires helping each other, then we're in a much better space. And especially the artistic community in Northwest Arkansas. This is I mean, you look at what Alice Walton has done with Crystal Bridges, and let's be clear. Crystal Bridges wasn't immune to the pandemic. They're still struggling with getting the numbers back up to pre-pandemic levels. So you're not alone in this. Nobody's alone in this. Nobody's like, picking on you because I can't get people through the doors, or I can't get that phone to ring, or whatever. Everybody has been impacted by this. But still, we need to be creative about how we answer the call, how we create new opportunities, how we do that, what I like to call pandemic pivot, and what that looks like. And I know that's kind of like a big answer to it, but it really is as simple as you staying in contact with people. And I would be willing to press, and I'll ask anybody here that's listening to this, if you are, no matter what type of creative that you are, and you have a list of clients or former clients, how many and I can't see hands, but somebody be willing to answer and say, you know what, Randy, I've got a list of 200 people that I've either done something for or worked with, but I'm terrible about getting in touch with them and reconnecting with them. Who's willing to admit that right now? Is anybody willing to? Okay, I got one hand up. Thank you so much. I can't see your name, but thank you. Judith Yanes had her hand raised. I see Orson over there. He didn't raise his hand, but that's fine. The bottom line is, or he raised both his hands. So the bottom line is, we all are there at times. And it's the one thing that I have excelled at, and that is staying relevant and staying in connection with folks, even in spite of everything that's going on, especially with it. And the thing that I've really been blessed with, I recently, unfortunately, lost, if you follow the podcast, you heard me talk about my brother-in-law. He died of a massive heart attack last month at the age of 48, 4 kids under 17. And it really hit me hard. I'm still struggling with it. But I mean, the outpouring of support that I got from people as I was dealing with my grief in the process was just, it was amazing. And that's just what this community is like. People should just come together. And Brittany and I were talking about the importance of community. And the thing that I see with regard to community, especially in the arts community in Northwest Arkansas, is that we all need to stick together. We all need to support each other and encourage each other and give those attaboys and attagirls and say, hey, way to go. Because, no matter what you think no matter how bad of a situation you might think that you're in, it could be worse. And there is nowhere to go but up. And that's why I created this second item here that you see, which is the rocket going up. And that is a company that I just created during this pandemic, right? Like, who needs to create anything during the pandemic? But I saw a need and I wanted to fill it. And essentially that need was to help people tell their story through podcasting, because podcasting is still in its early phases. Whether you, you've heard the stories about Spotify and Joe Rogan, and that's great. But people don't realize that the average podcaster, a successful podcaster, has 360,000 downloads a year. That's a successful podcaster. Now, I have friends that get 3 million downloads an episode. And those, even the people that are doing 360,000 episodes a year, they're at the top 1%. I'm telling everybody that will listen to me, you need to create a podcast. You need to tell your story early and often. It's one of the most cost-effective ways for you to get out there and do it. It doesn't require video. You don't have to put yourself out there on YouTube if you don't like it. I have a face for radio, so that's why I do podcasting. That's just my thing. And so Kyle Kellums and I joke about that all the time. But I have a face for radio, so that's why I like doing podcasting.
Yeah, it's just frustrating.
Somebody needs to mute themselves in the background, please.
Yes, sir.
If you guys, thank you. So that's the thing. And so I just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to start Story is Fuel. And all I'm doing with Story is Fuel is helping companies, businesses, for-profit and nonprofit, tell their story and put their best foot forward. But you guys are getting all of this here for free. And so let's just go through some of the ways that you can do that.
Randy, before you go through, or maybe we get there, we've got a question in the chat.
Yeah, that's fine.
Nandini, do you want to ask your question? Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Hello?
Yes, yeah. Hey, thank you, Randy. No, see, I come from India, where, especially as an artist, if you say, hey, I have done this, it means you're on an ego trip. Even stalwarts, even today, the teacher is the god, everything is because of the teacher. So how does somebody overcome it? How does somebody still take a stand and say what you have done without feeling like, I am on ego trip, I am bragging, I don't think this is good, I have to stay humble?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Nandini. I would simply say that part of it is understanding the cultural significance of where you are, right? I think here we like to celebrate success. We like to celebrate people that are able to create things. But yet and still, you're absolutely right. A lot of people struggle with being, the mouthpiece for their success. And all I'm here to say is there is a way for you to do it without being a braggart. There is a way for you to tell your story, because the way that I look at it is this way. Sometimes your story can be so powerful and so freeing and uplifting for somebody else that it is the one thing that frees them to do what they really want to do. That's the power of storytelling. We don't think of it that way because we're so hyper-focused on what people think about us and what we say. But the reality is that some people need to hear the story that you're holding on the inside, and you keep holding it on the inside because you're like, in my culture, we just don't do that. That's just not how we roll. And I totally respect and get that. But I think you need to also understand the culture where you are and how things are dictated. And I don't know, and I'm not going to say that that's necessarily a right or wrong approach when it comes to how things are done in India. But the reality is that there are countries where culturally it is boastful to talk about the things that you do. And I mean, I'm that's just not where I am. I'm here. And so I have to embrace the culture that I know. And so if you're here, I'm assuming you're here, then you need to embrace the culture where you are and figure out ways for you to tell your story and to share it with those that want to listen or will listen. And so, I mean, again, there's not an exact science about it. It's just the fact that I think it's a good thing to be able to do that. And you can do it and still be humble. You can do it and still be reserved, but people need to hear your story. They need to hear it as often as you're willing to tell it. And I love this from Mary Catherine Bateson. She was an anthropologist. She said the human species thinks in metaphors and learns through stories. Now, when you hear that quote, think about the simple fact that each and every one of you on this call is trying to educate somebody, is trying to show somebody something or share something with them. And that's why the stories matter. I saw that Orson Weems is on here. He's doing great things with music, the Music Education Initiative, and how he's trying to reach the widest audience possible. One of the simplest ways for him to reach those audiences are to tell the stories of the successful people that have come through his program or others that he's known about that are the genesis for why he created this program in the first place. That's the best testimony in the world right there. I mean, what else do you have to do but point to other people that have been successful in this space? And I know he works with especially those that want to learn how to do music production and to do live music production, which is a whole different animal. People that get out on the road and travel with all these groups and bands, and I mean, there's a whole ecosystem in that. And he's able to kind of take some of his skill set and training and background to relate that to what he's doing in his with his music education initiative. But he can do that all day long by telling stories. And it's not boastful because all he's doing is sharing success stories, sharing testimonies of people that have had success following this trait or that trait with regard to the business and the industry that he's in. And that can be applied across the board in any vertical, in any business, in any artistic endeavor. If you think about that, there are success stories there. If you're a watercolorist and you train people to do watercolors, or or corporate artwork or whatever, I mean, there are success stories that you have that where you've helped people become the best version of themselves through the skill set that you teach, through the artwork, through the creativity that you create. And you need to tell those stories. Don't keep that to yourself. I mean, the last thing you need to do is, I mean, like we say, I always, this is a reminder for me because I'm in the process of writing a book right now, that there are millions of untold stories in the graveyard. You don't want to be part of that number. When you leave here, you want to make sure you've told as many stories as you can tell. And it's just a simple reminder. Nobody's going to sit around saying, well, they were, I'm glad they kept all their great stories to themselves and we never learned about that. And they can relish in that in the afterlife, right? It's like, no, when I leave here, I'm exhausting everything when it comes to that. Anybody that will listen, any audience that I have, I'm going to tell stories early and often. And I think that's the thing that we need to be mindful of, because again, stories move the crowd, and that's why you have to shout it from the rooftops. So
Hey,
let's just
Randy,
talk. Yes,
quick question,
Kelsey.
just quick question is, and maybe this is something that we can kind of keep in mind as we go, but I love having a series of talks because I'm already thinking about a session yesterday, like with what you're talking about, like you have to tell your story, you have to shout it from the rooftops. And yesterday the session was all about, yeah, but which story and when, because we, like nonprofits especially, and creative businesses, we have the advantage of having really warm, fuzzy, beautiful things to say.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that we should tell all 99 stories that we have all at once. It's that
Right.
strategy so that we focus who we are so people don't get too confused. So I am curious to know how to distill all the beautiful stories that we have to tell so that we keep somebody's attention, keep their focus, because the internet alone is extremely noisy and loud and competitive. So how do we distill our story and be consistent with our story across our team, our volunteers? So I just am thinking about yesterday's session. So please do get on our website after this is all over, because we have a good messaging framework. And I know that another session this afternoon, we're going to dig into that more. So curious to hear what you have to say about that as well, Randy.
Yeah, well, Kelsey, the check is in the mail because I appreciate the way you queued it up so perfectly. There are different types of storytelling, and I'm only going to get into a few of them. I will say this for all of you: do yourselves a favor and either read A Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, or watch, and you can just YouTube this. Just type in YouTube, Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. Bill Moyers interviewed Joseph Campbell before he died, and it is the most amazing interview ever. And Joseph Campbell is kind of like he is the father figure of storytelling and just how storytelling has existed throughout time. So if you really want to go, to nerd out on it, that would certainly be worth an hour or two of your time. And Bill Moyers, for those of you that know him, was an amazing interviewer. So just go to YouTube, type in Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell, Hero's Journey. And there are some great free videos to watch. And then if you can, just get Joseph Campbell's book, A Hero's Journey, and start there in terms of understanding the power of storytelling. Because again, I'm not suggesting that you have a story for everything, because that's not necessarily necessary. But I will say this. Here are 4 basic areas that you should be thinking about, right? And so whenever I start my podcast, the first thing out of my mouth is, so tell me your superhero origin story. And I do that for 2 reasons. One, I want people to know and relate to the person that I'm actually interviewing, right? Because if I just say, hey, this is Bob Jones or Sally Johnson, ABC, whatever, and I'm interviewing them today, that's that. But if I then have those individuals basically relate to us their superhero origin story, where they came from, why they're here in Northwest Arkansas, what they're doing here, the whole 9 yards, then they get a chance to really make a connection with people. So that's why your origin story is important, right? Because everybody needs to know who you are and why should people care? Why should I care about you? So when I tell people about I Am Northwest Arkansas, I tell them who I am. I'm a transplant here. I'm not a native. I didn't grow up here. I don't have the frame of reference of remembering what it was like to drive to Little Rock before the Bobby Hopper Tunnel was built. So I don't know anything about that. I got here in 2013, so my life's a little different than somebody that grew up here and has seen a total transformation of this space, right? Now I think about it, and my wife and I talk about it all the time. We've been here 8 years, and we're amazed at how much has changed just in the last 8 years. Can you imagine what it's going to be like by 2040 when we're almost 1 million people? That's one of the fastest growing MSAs in the country. So your origin story is important. Who are you and why should people care? And the same thing is that you turn that question around and you can ask any one of your clients, any one of your customers, students. You want to learn, you want people to open up and share with you, because the moment that they do that, and they especially get intensely a little bit more personal with you, you'll find a greater connection with those individuals. So you want to be able to do that. One of the other great storylines is being an overcomer. We all have a testimony to share, okay? So what obstacles have you overcome? You, those of you that are watching this, what obstacles have you overcome, and what giants have you slain? We've all been David at some point in time in our lives. And some of us have slain bigger giants than others. Those stories matter because we all have Goliaths in our lives. And it's important for us to recognize what that is. It might be in your business. It may not be. But those stories are important. Somebody going to ask a question? Are you, Kelsey? Or I hear something in the background.
There is a question in the chat.
Sure, go ahead.
Can all of these types of storytelling coexist at once? And that's from Judith.
When you say coexist at once, I'm assuming you meaning like within the same story, like would I go from telling my origin story to how I overcame a situation and then how I educated somebody? Yeah, you absolutely can. Some of these stories can merge into others. So like you think about it, think of like Star Wars, right? And I always use that as an example because Joseph Campbell was the inspiration for George Lucas when he was writing Star Wars. He says it very clearly. If it wasn't for Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, I could have never created the Luke Skywalker storyline. And so, yes, because if you think about it, we think we are getting the origin story. We're only getting the origin story for one aspect of that storyline. We are shown we're thrust into, if you think about Star Wars, the original Star Wars came out in 1977. I was 8 years old. I can remember it like it was yesterday. It came out in May of 77. And I know I'm dating myself now, but it was just an amazing story. I wanted to be Chewbacca. That was just my thing at the time, so don't judge me. The bottom line was we got thrust right into seeing this one character. But then when you get to see all 9 of the movies and the whole story unfolds, you're just seeing one section of it, right? And all we see is the David and Goliath story right at the beginning of Star Wars: A New Hope. But we have to go all the way back to the beginning Phantom Menace and some of the others to really understand, oh, okay, I see how this all fits together and works out. And if you look at the whole story, the whole Star Wars saga in its totality, you've got an origin story that sits on its own, but then you have many origin stories that are told within the greater framework. You have the Overcomer, the David and Goliath story that's told in several of the episodes. You have stories that educate why what you do is special, right? When we see the whole process and metamorphosis that Luke Skywalker goes on when he goes to Dagobah system with Yoda. And again, don't judge me. I'm just a Star Wars fanboy, so that's just what it is. And then stories that inspire. Talk about ways that you move the crowd. Talk about the things that you do that really get people excited about what you do. How do you do that? And again, I know that might seem boastful, but it's not. You need to be able to share those stories. And yes, all of these basic storylines can exist within the same story. You just have to figure out how you want to weave them together. I have a lot of stories that I tell, and I tell them in different ways, and I tell them for different reasons. But then I have kind of like an overarching story that I can tell that kind of merges into it several of these different concepts. And these aren't the only concepts. I just wanted to give you a few. We don't have enough time today to even go through them all, but 7 basic types of stories. Okay, I'm going to give you 7. Overcoming the monster. That's kind of like the whole David and Goliath thing. The quest, right? That's kind of like you're searching for something. Rags to riches. You know, we've seen that with Cinderella. Voyage and return. That we all have this journey in front of us that we have to go on. And the goal is to go on this journey successfully and get back home. Okay, we think of like the Odyssey and stories like that. Tragedies. Think of like Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet. Comedies. And then, of course, rebirth. And, what happens when we are like the phoenix. We rise out of the ashes. Like Maya Angelou said, and still I rise. Right? There are all these different story types that we can tell that honestly, if I were to sit down with any one of you, even for 60 minutes, would be wholly applicable to what your experiences have been. You just have to kind of fit them into those molds and help yourself to mold it together to create a story that fits that type of storyline. But there's a lot of different storylines, but these are some of the basic ones that you see. I mean, when you think of like Walt Disney. Walt Disney was a master of storytelling, and Disney is a master of storytelling. But the thing about it was that all Walt Disney did was reuse and repurpose a lot of the different heroes' journey storylines. So there's nothing new under the sun, right? Because a lot of you are thinking, well, I want something unique, Randy. You just don't understand. My story is so unique, and nobody else has been through what I've been through. Yes, they have. And I'm not saying that to put you down. I'm just saying there is nothing new under the sun when it comes to storytelling. We have been telling stories since time began on cave walls, and now we're telling stories in front of people. We're telling stories in 15-second increments on TikTok, which I'm about to talk about. So it is our storytelling has taken on a life of its own in this day and age, especially with all the technology that's available to us. And so it's incumbent upon you to find out the technology that you feel most comfortable with to be able to tell your story. And that kind of takes me to the next step. I want to talk about Tabitha Brown. And I don't know why that line's like that, but that was not meant to be there that way. Some of you know about Tabitha Brown. Tabitha Brown, she was, the thing I like to talk about Tabitha Brown is that she has acted and she's done work prior to her taking off on social media. Because a lot of people see her and say, man, she's just like an overnight sensation. There's no such thing as an overnight sensation. These people, you just didn't see them putting in the real work. Like a lot of you guys have been toiling tirelessly for years in your closets, in your quiet space, working. And then people all of a sudden see you and they start hearing about you in magazines and on KNWA and all this stuff. And people are like, oh my God, it's just like an overnight sensation. And you're sitting there like, no, I'm not. I've been doing this for the last 20 years. Tabitha Brown was doing this for 20 years before she finally kind of put it all together. And here's the beauty about Tabitha Brown. She has never relinquished who she is and tried to be something that she is not. And that's an important lesson for all of us to learn. You have to be uniquely you. Paul Stolt has to be uniquely him. Judith has to be uniquely her. Jeannie has to be uniquely her. Justine Beach has to be uniquely her. Everybody, each one of us has to be uniquely us. And we have to own and like who we are. Okay? And so Tabitha Brown's story is great. And when I think about her, she owns her market. She owns her story. A lot of you who know her, who have watched it, you know her catchphrases like this, like that, because that's my business. You know, you've heard it before. Some of you are like, oh yeah, I know who that is. And now she's written a book and told her story, because stories matter. And her book is freeing for a lot of people. Look at the title, Feeding the Soul, Finding Our Way to Joy, Love, and Freedom. Somebody's on. If somebody could mute themselves, I'd appreciate that. I can hear something in the background. So she's not only a YouTuber and TikToker, she's on Instagram. She's an actress. She's producing her own show on the Food Network, and she's a spokesperson for Target. If that isn't enough, so she's totally owned it. And the thing about it is, she's never had to compromise who she is. And so for a lot of us that are looking at her saying, man, over the past couple of years, just because of where technology is and all, she's taken advantage of that and taken her unique story and shared it with the world. And now she's got a tribe of thousands that listen to her and follow her every move. And that's why companies have said, oh, we want to be in the Tabitha Brown business, you know. And there are people that are looking at some of you saying, oh, I want to be in the fill in the blank business. I want to work with this person, or I want to do something with this person. And again, a lot of it is because you're willing to put yourself out there and to share your story with others so that people can know, wow, okay, this is what makes you special. This is what sets you apart. Because again, here's the thing. We are all special. We are in our own rights. We all have a unique DNA. My thumbprint is different than yours. And again, my only competition is the person that you're looking at, me. I don't compete against you, and you don't compete against me. And you know, we have to remind ourselves of that. But Tabitha Brown is a great story. If you ever get a chance, just follow her on Instagram or YouTube. Watch her YouTube channel and her TikTok. And again, she has basically perfected the utilization of these different social media platforms to tell her story. And this is the area where I think a lot of us struggle.
Hey, Randy.
So yes.
We've got another question in the chat from
Sure.
Paul Stolt. Paul, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Okay. Well, Randy, given that most people's attention spans are extremely short right now, would you suggest outside of podcasting, if someone's going to blog or if they're going to do other posts, that they keep them to one of the 4 stories and tease the next one so that they can start to build a following for their messaging?
You know, that's a great question, Paul. I thank you for asking that, and I'm glad you bring that up. And this particular slide kind of dovetails nicely into that. Yes, the long and short of it is that you need to parcel out your storylines, so it might look different on different platforms. If you blog about your origin story, you could theoretically write about it all in one article, right? But if you were to tell that same story through Instagram, it might be several reels that you tell, or on TikTok, it might be several postings. And it's kind of like the way that I look. If you go in, and here's the other thing too, all of these platforms that you see represented on your screen do different things, and people go to them with different expectations about how they're going to be entertained, how they're going to be educated. People go to TikTok. Honestly, it's you know, a lot of it is the mindless scrolling, right? What people don't realize is that the TikTok algorithm is so powerful, it continues to feed you things that it thinks you're interested in, and 99.9% of the time, it's hyper accurate. That's why TikTok is so powerful, and that's why I have to keep an eye on my 12-year-old Aiden, because he likes making TikToks, But then TikTok feeds him so many things that are appropriate for him and what he wants to watch, and some things that aren't appropriate, that I have to really be mindful of that. And in the same way, when you're creating content, when you're telling stories, you need to be thinking about that platform that you're using. So YouTube, again, it gives you the opportunity to tell long form stories. But I think the sweet spot for a YouTube video episode is like, I think it's like less than 10 minutes, but some run longer than that. I mean, Joe Rogan shows 3-hour interviews with like people all the time, and people, the viewership of those are really high. Instagram, that's why Instagram has so many different categories. They have the stories, which are really short and to the point. You have posts, which have a different type of staying power, and then you have reels, which allows you to tell short form storytelling in a way that creates a narrative, and you can continue on. And reels was really created to compete with TikTok, and it's doing a decent job, but it just different platforms for different people. You have a younger set on TikTok, but now you have older people. Now you have accountants on TikTok that are telling a story and walking people through how to do simple things like balance your books at the end of the month if you're a business, how to balance your books at the end of the month if you're a sole proprietor. And there are ways for you to tell your story on these different platforms. Twitter is still valuable, whether Elon Musk buys it or not. It is still a great platform for you to find out information and to let it be a sounding board. I use Twitter a lot to search. LinkedIn is very valuable, and especially for creatives, I would encourage you to create a LinkedIn account, even though for a lot of you probably think that's business, business, business. It's more than that. And I would certainly encourage you to at least have a profile on LinkedIn so that people that might be searching in that way can find you. And so, like, even for I Am Northwest Arkansas, I have a platform on all of those that I share out different pieces of information on, and I make sure that I try to share that information as often as possible. But Paul, to get back to your question, you need to start developing and know those stories inside and out. Start with that core 4 that I shared with you. Have those down pat, but then look at them and say, oh, okay, well, here's my origin story. How could I parcel this out on TikTok? Or how could I parcel it out on YouTube or Instagram and share little tidbits about about who I am or about what I do, so that I can, garner a following, right? Because you don't need that many people to follow you. It's only a few. And I liken it to this. The beauty of the internet, and that's why I said the internet is the great equalizer nowadays. 20 years ago, we couldn't have had this conversation, and everybody would have been saying it costs a lot of money to get in front of people. It costs almost nothing to get in front of people. Nowadays, you just have to be mindful of noting who's effective at reaching an audience, and how could content that you create be replicated in that same fashion so that you can, get the word out and let people know about you. And so that's why I have like Apple Podcasts and Spotify on here, because those are also ways to get your message out through a podcast. Amazon is another great resource to kind of, for those of you that are in certain segments of the artistic community that sells certain types of artifacts and wares. Amazon's a good resource. Obviously, Facebook, Meta, whatever they're calling themselves nowadays, is another good place. I mean, you can ignore all of these at your peril, because you might say, well, that ship has sailed. But I know people in their 60s that have mastered, or in 70s that have mastered social media and are using it to their advantage right now. So this whole idea that, and some of these others, this other one over here, this is Discord. A lot of the kids, like if you ask your grandkids or your kids about Discord, they can probably tell you about that. But this is actually a really great source of communication. I communicate with a lot of people on Discord. And of course, the ghost is Snapchat. And Snapchat is nice because you can create information, put it out there, and then after a certain point, it goes away. And that's actually what the kids like nowadays. So depending on who your market is and who you're trying to attract and reach, that might be a viable alternative too. Snapchat also really works well from a geofencing perspective, so that if you're doing something where you interact with a younger audience, you can utilize Snapchat and advertise in a certain space, so that when people are around your place of business or around where you operate, their information will show up in these individual Snapchats when they have it open, because these people have Snapchat open all the time. And then, of course, the final
Randy?
one, yes.
I was just wondering if people could put in the chat. Can you put a 1 in the chat if you're using Snapchat? I'm just curious if anyone's using it, because that geofencing thing, thinking about nonprofits and how many events they're doing. Is anybody using Snapchat in this group? That's interesting.
That'd be interesting to know.
Okay.
Yeah, it would
What was
be.
the last
Yeah,
one? Sorry, Randy. What was
yeah,
the
yeah,
last
no
one?
worries. The last one is this is the old school method. This is the one I like the most. Is the
Oh.
telephone.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just good to get on the phone. You know, people laugh. People laugh. I have friends that, you know, they feed their family with a phone. Period. End of story. And not that any of you are salespeople, but you are. And what you need to be thinking about is, how do I stay in contact with folks and connect with them? You know, maybe you have a list of 150 clients that you've worked with. You should, if you have a list of that size, right? And we think about, what is it, Robinson's Law, where we all have like 150 connections. But if you think about that, you need to be on the phone with all 150 of those people. Even if they just get a voicemail from you, you need to be checking in with those individuals. Now, some of you might say, well, Randy, I mean, I've got 2,000 people on my list. That's fine. I try to keep in touch with everybody. And again, technology affords me that. Whenever I have a moment, I send somebody a text message. And then when I don't do that, the other thing that I'll send, and people know this about me, I'll send a video message or a voice message right through text, just to check in and say, hey, how you doing? You know, it's one thing to send somebody a birthday greeting, a text message. It's a whole other thing for somebody to take the time to shoot a 30-second video and send that greeting over to them, or record a 30-second message telling that person how much you appreciate them and sending that message over to them. Again, nowadays, the all of the opportunities are at your disposal, and we carry this amazing computer in our pockets at all times. Most of us do, right? Some of us have jitterbugs, some of us have flip phones still. It's fine. No judgment here. But if you have a smartphone, you need to be smart about it and use it to its fullest extent. And don't be so, you know, special that, you know, that's beyond me. I don't do that. I want to touch the people. Yeah, you can touch the people all you want, but I'm telling you right now, in order to be able to walk and chew gum and do all the other stuff you need to do, you need to leverage this technology right here to your advantage, and find out what works for you, right? Because what works for Orson might not work for Judith, and what works for Judith might not work for Justine, and what works for Justine might not work for Paul. So everybody's going to find their own lane. I mean, don't hear me very clearly. Randy is not suggesting that you stop all that you're doing and learn all these platforms. That is not what I'm saying. But find the platforms that work for you and then go deep. So if you say, hey, you know what, I really like Instagram, I put all my stuff up on Instagram, then learn all you can about Instagram. Be a master of your domain within the Instagram space, and then figure out, okay, here's how I'm going to tell my story on this platform. Because you don't have to be all things to all people, and you don't have to be all places. Once you know where your market is, then you have that opportunity available to you. Somebody going to ask something?
I was just going to interject to say that I think that that's probably a great note to end on, is tailoring, using the platform that works best for you. We are very quickly running out of time. So I just want to make sure that anyone who hasn't had an opportunity to ask a question has an opportunity to do so now. If you want to just unmute and shout it out, you don't need to use the chat if you have any burning questions.
And I just want to mention, this is homework for everybody, and I'm going to come to your house or your place of business and check that you've done this. But I just want to mention, optimize all your online content for SEO and conversion, because that stuff is real. Search engine optimization is still very, very real. Make sure you update your about page, your bio, freshen up your photographs. If you've got stuff from 7, 8 years ago, we all look different. I had to stop. I had one. I have a lot of gray hair now, so I got a new photo with all my gray hair and all its splendor. So be real, right? Let people know that you're real and that you're not trying to be something that you aren't. And anything else that represents you and your brand, you need to work on. And this is the last thing, big piece of homework for you. If you have a website, create a press kit. simple press kit that has a lot of the same information in that press kit. So if anybody wants to know about you, I can go to one place. I can get all of Orson's information. I can get a headshot. I can get his bio. If I'm going to have him on a program, whatever, I can go right to one place, and you can always share that, because invariably all of you will share some variation of that information, and you just want to make it as easy as possible for people that are trying to learn more about you, or that are trying to feature you, or if the press comes calling, you want to be ready. Act as if. So any questions?
And I'm going to plug, on that note, I'm going to plug that we are going to have a session on Thursday afternoon at 3:30 specifically about how to create and tool a press kit. So if you don't have one of those, if you are looking to get started or even just refresh what's in your press kit, please consider coming on Thursday. I want to thank Randy and all of you for joining us today. This has been a really lovely conversation.